Hey storyteller, no matter how exciting or action-packed your scenes are, if they're all too similar, readers won't finish the story. Too many slow-paced scenes will bore them, but too many action scenes will leave them feeling overwhelmed with sensory overload. That's why today we'll explore 12 types of scenes you can use to keep readers connected with your characters and turning pages. Plus, I'll share 2 bonus scene types at the very end of the video, so be sure to keep watching. Welcome to this week's writer coaching session, the first video in a brand new series on writing powerful scenes. I'm Bridget from B Squared Writer Coaching, an author, editor, and your story coach, here to help you make your story powerful, polished, and publishable, so you can move readers and help them experience your character's adventure with maximum emotional impact. First, I have a gift for you just for visiting my channel. My ultimate guide to dialogue punctuation. Dialogue is perhaps the most powerful element you can use in a scene to create reader engagement and connect those readers with your characters. But if it isn't punctuated and formatted correctly, it can cause confusion instead. This guide gives you all the rules for formatting not only ordinary dialogue, but character thoughts, interruptions, and fragmented speech in just a few easy-to-follow pages with examples. Just click the link in the description or visit b2writercoaching.com/dialogue. That's the letter B, the number 2, writercoaching.com/dialogue to download your copy. And be sure to stick around to the end of this video so you won't miss those 2 bonus scene types I talked about, plus this week's Power Up, a super practical action step you can use right now in the story you're working on. Before we can discuss the types of scenes, you may be wondering, what is a scene? Just as in a movie or stage play, a scene in a short story or novel is a segment of the story that depicts an incident or situation through the description of action and significant interactions between characters. Like a tiny story within a longer one, a scene should have some kind of conflict or dilemma, plus a beginning, a middle, and an end. The dialogue and description should indicate a clear time and place in which the scene is occurring, and your character's actions, reactions, and dilemmas should advance the overall plot. All the scenes in a story should work together to form one cohesive narrative. Every scene's main jobs are to move the story forward and keep readers engaged. I'm going to run through these scene types pretty fast because we have a lot to get through, so you may want to take screenshots of the graphics I put up or save this video for future reference so you can take notes. You can, of course, always pause and rewind if you missed something. Some of the information presented in this video is based on the book Make a Scene, Writing a Powerful Story One Scene at a Time by Jordan Rosenfeld. This is one of the writing craft books I found most helpful when writing my debut novel, and I've placed a link to it in the description. I've divided these scene types into several categories to make the video easier to follow. We'll start with, of course, beginnings. This includes prologues and opening scenes. A prologue is a short scene that appears before the real story begins. I say short because that is a really good rule of thumb to follow. You don't want your prologue to be longer than, I would say, maybe 4 pages, though that's not a hard and fast rule. A prologue can depict an event from the near future or distant past. Prologues can be written from the point of view of a character who died before the real story began, a character who isn't the protagonist but whose perspective provides crucial information, or an omniscient narrator. We can use prologue scenes to do the following: offer key plot or character information that comes before or after the main story, reveal the point of view of a character who is not part of the current story or is no longer alive but is crucial to the story, hook the reader, create foreshadowing if we're using a flash forward scene as the prologue, or deepen the reader's understanding of a particular character. Here are a few cautions to be aware of when writing prologues. A prologue is not the true opening scene of your story. Some readers skip prologues, and some publishers do not accept manuscripts that include them. So make sure your story can be understood even without the prologue. Now on to the true opening scene of your story. The opening scene is an introduction to the key players and their problem, which takes place just before the inciting incident shatters their ordinary world. For more on inciting incidents and what those are, check out this video linked above, and I'll also link it in the description. Opening scenes introduce the protagonist and hint at his or her internal and external conflicts. Note that some scenes begin with either an antagonist or a different character besides the protagonist, usually another primary character or co-protagonist, but even those scenes will at least hint at something about your protagonist. Opening scenes also establish the setting of the story, must make promises to the reader regarding conflicts, obstacles, obstacles and the resolutions yet to come. An opening scene should either include the inciting incident or an event that leads to it. Now let's look at the scene types that will be faster paced in your story. Those include action scenes, suspense scenes, and dramatic scenes. Note that I'm not including the climax here. I'm saving that for a section on ending scenes, but the climax should be the fastest pace, but definitely the point of highest tension and highest stakes in your story. Also, for tips on pacing your story, since we are discussing faster paced scenes, check out this video linked above, and I'll also link it in the description. When we think of action scenes, images of car chases, explosions, and battles often come to mind. Action scenes are not limited to these, however. They include any scene in which physical activity and increased stakes are the main components. Action scenes should show the protagonist acting first, thinking later. In moments of high intensity, the protagonist is forced to react or make quick decisions without thinking. Action scenes must depict events happening in real time, not summarized, allowing the reader to participate. They must be fast-paced and include physical movement, and they should lead to unexpected consequences for the protagonist. How do we write suspense scenes? Well, suspense is a state of uncertainty that produces anxiety in your character and your reader. That can be positive, like will the protagonist win the contest? Or negative, will the villain find her? Either way, suspense makes readers turn pages. Suspense scenes complicate the emotional, physical, or spiritual stakes for the protagonist, keep increasing the emotional intensity for the protagonist, and do not let up until the end. Put pressure on the protagonist to change or take action through events, fellow characters, or the antagonist. Show the protagonist being thrown into trouble or danger right from the beginning of the scene. Delay conclusions to the scene's events. Prevent the protagonist from achieving his goal or disrupt his or her intentions, and often end in a cliffhanger. For the 10 best ways to create suspense in your story, check out this video linked above, and I'll also link it in the description. Dramatic scenes can cause readers to cry, laugh, hold their breaths, bite their nails, or even throw a book across the room. Dramatic scenes carry the emotional elements of the story. Dramatic scenes should drive the protagonist to a point of change by forcing him or her to face unpleasant situations or make difficult decisions that will cause radical shifts in the way he or she thinks and acts. Dramatic scenes focus on the protagonist's feelings. Be sure to make your protagonist's reactions to these things intense. They also stir up the reader's emotions. Focus on emotional intensity, blowout fights, devastating betrayals, obsessive love letters, etc. They increase your protagonist's self-awareness and hint to the reader that the protagonist is facing a turning point. Are you finding this helpful so far? If so, be sure to click the like button so YouTube will show this video to more writers like you. Let's look at 4 types of scenes that focus on reflection or revelation. These include contemplative scenes, which focus on reflection, dialogue scenes, which can be revelatory, epiphany scenes, which can be both reflective and revelatory, or one or the other, and flashbacks. These scenes slow the pace of the story but should still convey tension, just on a lower scale than more fast-paced scenes would. When you hear the term contemplative scene, you might think this sounds a little boring, but they serve a very important function in stories. To depict a protagonist's gradual transformation, we sometimes need to show this person sorting through past events, small details of information he's gained, or his thoughts and feelings as he tries to determine the next steps. Scenes that focus on contemplation like this should be brief and not used very often. Contemplative scenes slow the pace and create a pause after an intense scene to allow the protagonist, other characters, and the reader to catch their breaths. Give the protagonist time to dissect and react to previous events and epiphanies in order to make a decision on how to move forward. May use the protagonist's internal monologue thoughts to reveal information to the reader, provide a glimpse into the protagonist's private life, or show how the protagonist interacts with himself or herself or his or her surroundings without other characters present. These scenes should include dramatic tension to avoid becoming dull. They can include suspense, intense internal conflict, foreshadowing of potential danger, foreboding, like hints at unspecified danger the viewpoint character is sensing, or use the setting to create an eerie or unsettling atmosphere. A contemplative scene should end in a way that leads to a more active scene, with foreshadowing, a surprise, a moment of decision, or a sudden action that creates a cliffhanger. For a helpful resource on balancing more intense scenes with contemplative ones, check out the book Scenes and Sequels: How to Write Page-Turning Fiction by Mike Claassen. I've provided a link for that in the description. The term dialogue scene may seem a little confusing because most scenes include at least some dialogue. However, some use conversations as their main focus and primary method of introducing new information. If you are writing a dialogue scene, don't forget to establish the setting early on in the scene, include some character actions, and use dialogue attributions to identify not only who is speaking, but what's going on between the lines of conversation. Dialogue scenes should reveal more about the protagonist's personality, feelings, and perceptions, introduce plot elements or new information, require the character to earn the new information, don't make revelations too easy, show the viewpoint character's emotions and reactions to new information, and move the plot and character development forward. Dialogue scenes can be used to reveal character, plot, or backstory information, slow the pace to give the protagonist an opportunity to catch his or her breath, pick up the pace, if that dialogue includes snappy and brief lines, add conflict and opposition. The conversation can be a sort of tug-of-war or argument, and it can reveal emotions, fears, and motivations. Perhaps the most obvious type of revelatory scene is the epiphany scene. An epiphany is a sudden awareness or insight that dawns on the viewpoint character, usually the protagonist, as a result of previous events and revelations. Epiphany scenes can come at a cost, may renew the protagonist's hope, faith, or resolve, or set him or her on a new path, arise out of plot events and information, often help the protagonist break through his or her denial, and force the protagonist to make a choice or a change. Backstory events that are presented in the form of a scene are known as flashbacks. These types of scenes allow the reader to experience events from a character's past through action, dialogue, character development, etc. Note that even though I've included flashbacks with other slower-paced scenes, they can include high stakes and escalated tension. They can take the form of action scenes or other scene types we've discussed. However, they stop the forward motion of the current story in its tracks. Flashbacks should focus on action, information, and character interactions, illustrate or explain a plot or character element from the current story, help the reader understand the protagonist on a deeper level. Here are a few guidelines to consider when writing a flashback scene. Don't follow a cliffhanger with a flashback. You will frustrate readers because flashbacks pause the current story's action and pull the reader out of the protagonist's current point of view. Use clear transitions into and out of flashback scenes, so readers are certain the scene does not occur within the time frame of the main story. Use less setting and sensory detail and shorten your descriptions. Make sure the flashback is actually relevant to the present events of the main story and to what is currently happening at that point to the protagonist. In other words, be careful where you place your flashback because you want it to relate somehow to what is currently going on in the previous scene with your protagonist. And ask yourself, how will this flashback help readers understand more about the protagonist? How can it increase the unknowns that the reader will want resolved? Is there another way to give the reader or the characters the necessary information the flashback contains in order to avoid using a flashback? And is this the right time and place for a flashback? Let's look at 3 scene types that are involved in a story's ending: the climax, the closing scene or scenes, and epilogues. Climactic scenes are either a single scene or series that depict the moment of highest tension, drama, action, and stakes in the story. Everything in the story has been building to this point, and this is where the conflicts will boil over. The climactic scene must be fast-paced, show opposing forces colliding. For example, the protagonist and antagonist meet and clash. Directly relate to the main conflict or story problem. Be a point of no return. The protagonist must confront something or someone in order to change or be changed. The climactic scene must show the protagonist experiencing high emotions to evoke a strong emotional response in the reader, and be the moment of highest stakes, which can include life or death, relational ties about to be severed, kingdoms or wars about to be lost or won, etc. Now let's look at final or resolution scenes. The closing scene or scenes will provide an ending to the part of the protagonist's life depicted in this particular story. Final resolution of the events caused by the inciting incident. However, this is rarely the end of the protagonist's entire life story. It may even signal the beginning of a new adventure. Final scenes should reveal the state of the protagonist after the conclusion of the main plot, physically, emotionally, and relationally. Think of this as a snapshot of the protagonist at the very end of a significant situation. These scenes should reveal the protagonist's change or lack thereof. If the protagonist doesn't change, show the changes his or her actions have caused in others. These scenes should be reflective, provide a full circle feeling, recalling the significant story events and situations. This isn't a recap of everything that has gone on in the story. There just should be some hints at what happened and what came before. These scenes should move at a slower pace and do not require as much action as other scenes. An epilogue is a scene depicting an event that occurs after the resolution of the main story. Epilogues usually show something happening in the future, whether that's near future, like a few months or a few days from now, or the distant future. And they may show a snapshot of the protagonist's future life, a surprising twist in another character's point of view, used most often in series, a glimpse at the story world as a whole through an omniscient narrator. And just a side note, as with prologues, you may not want to include information that's crucial to the main story because some readers will skip epilogues. If you haven't done so already, be sure to download your Ultimate Guide to Dialogue Punctuation. Remember, just click the link in the description or visit b2writercoaching.com/dialogue. And now for this week's Power Up, examine your story and make a list of the types of scenes you have used. Then ask yourself these questions. Do you need to create more variety in the types of scenes you've used? For example, do you have too many action scenes in a row? Is there a scene type we've listed that you haven't used? Would that scene type fit your story? If so, try writing that kind of scene to correspond with a time in the story when you think it would be most beneficial. Now, I did promise you 2 bonus scene types, right? There are 2 types of scenes we can use that center around the style of conflict, which is arguably the most important element in a scene. Check out this video on the one thing every scene needs, where I explain how these scenes work and go into detail on how to write them. And let's power up your storytelling.